Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show, and I've got a great guest on, Jodi O'Donnell-Ames. I think it's Ames. She'll tell me if I got that wrong. I probably got it wrong. I can barely remember my own name, let alone somebody else's. He'll be telling us about some amazing work she's done, setting up a non-profit supporting family members of people who've lost someone to ALS, and we shall learn about that. It's a topic close to my own heart because my sister died of MND, motor neurone disease. ALS is part of that, so it was very important to me to have this on and just to sort of honour her and her memory as well, which and we're all part of a sort of very specific and unique community in that sense. Just to remind you folks, this is a pre-record. But if you have any questions, do drop them into me on WhatsApp, 07506 319 745. The number will be underneath the video. Jodie's in the US, so don't try and call her. It'll be some odd time in the morning for her. So leave her alone. Send me the messages, and I'll pass them on to Jodie, who's joining us from New Jersey, which is just underneath New York or just above New York. I can't remember which one, but she'll tell us in a moment. So do drop me any questions, I'll pass them on. And with that, that's me done. Just to welcome Jodie. Thanks so much for making time for the second time to come on the show and share about us. Jodie, originally the sort of recording was going to happen a couple of days ago, and I had a clinical issue to deal with, so Jodie's very kindly pushed it back and went out a couple of days later and joined us. It's your Monday morning, I think, isn't it, Jodie? Early.
It is. And thank you so much for what you do and for having me as a guest. I appreciate it.
It's great. It's great. You're based over on the East Coast. Have you always been there? Is that your sort of home?
I have. I'm a Jersey girl through and through.
Right,
I'm
right. What
raised in
does
New Jersey, and people forget that it's called the Garden State, and where I live is just absolutely beautiful, close to Princeton, New
yeah.
Jersey, and it's country here. I have to drive about 20 minutes to get to the nearest grocery store. So when people think of New Jersey, that's not what they think about.
No, no, it's not actually. Hey, did you grow up in this area where you're living at the moment?
I grew up about 45 minutes south of here in a very small town. And it's over 2 miles, 2 square miles in Palmyra, New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah. And was it in, it's a small town, it's a country girl, would you say, or sort of?
No, a very small town, but not country, blue collar, you know, kind of business, factory business area. And
From a sort of small family, or do you have siblings, you know?
big family. I have 4 siblings.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, 5 of us and in one house with one bathroom
Was-
without AC. As a
Yeah,
matter,
quite.
as a matter of fact,
Uh,
I just recall memories. Was talking recently to someone, and we had sheets hanging. We had sheets hanging. You grow up and you have no idea of what's normal, what's not normal. But because we didn't have any money, my parents had AC in one room, and they would put sheets on all the doors because the sheets would keep the coolness in one
yeah,
room. So we all hung out in one room.
yeah.
Then if
In
it,
the UK, people are not used to AC, and so they still do things like they leave the door open and put the AC on, and then think, why is it not cooling down?
right, exactly.
You're letting in the hot air, so
Yeah. So, very small house, one bathroom, and I can remember getting ready, for high school senior prom. And as I'm putting my makeup and doing my hair, it's like melting in front of me because we had no AC. So it's
oh, how funny.
inevitable that I wasn't going to look my best, that's for
Okay.
sure.
And because you live in that part of the world, I imagine there's a lot of families that have moved to the US, haven't they? So were your family from the US over several generations, or were they immigrants?
Immigrants. So yes, so my grandparents both were right from Italy. So
Okay, right.
yeah,
That's the cultural background.
and we can trace them where they were, where they came in New York, and trace
Wow.
their histories, and it's very fascinating and
Yeah.
incredible. I think that's what they did.
Because that's what we all think of as New York, Ellis Island, the big, the Statue of Liberty, welcoming people coming over, and yeah,
And they were welcomed.
yeah, yeah. And also because I come from an Irish cultural background, so both my parents came from Ireland.
Okay.
So lots of Irish and lots of Italians and lots of Catholics all over the place, really.
You know they make a good pair, the Irish and the
Yes,
Italians.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so, and what was your experience of growing up? You said of lots of support from your family. Are they your siblings are girls, boys, or?
So I have two sisters and two brothers,
Right.
and big family, and very supportive family, and
Yeah.
very caring family. And I come from a family of doers.
Yeah.
We do. we we were taught, my parents, it's interesting. My parents and my siblings, none of them were educated.
Yeah.
And education can be street education or formal education. And
Yeah.
the street education was you figure it out and you get it
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. 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 Very
So
industrious, getting things done. It's I mean, a lot of immigrant communities are like that. You just get on with life, don't you? And there's this sort of strong work ethic. You
very
take
strong.
opportunities and you go for them. You don't let anything hold you back. And so,
No, and I tease because you know, this is the different world, right? So my kids, I gave them mental health days and had them stay home when they weren't
yeah,
doing well,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Brought them hot chocolate and had them take a bath and
absolutely.
massage their feet. And my parents were, if you're not, are you sick?
Yeah,
What kind of sick?
yeah, yeah.
You
Is it a
know?
falling? Is it a falling limb
Yeah,
falling off sick?
you don't need the ER, then get to school right now.
Yeah, yeah. I remember all that. I mean, me and my brother, we were very close. We sort of, we imagined we were stuntmen as little boys. It was the first time, that movie, The Fall Guy, that's just come out with Ryan Gosling and
Heard of it, I haven't
Emily
seen it.
Blunt. It's based upon a television series of the same name, which was big at one point, called The Fall Guy, about a guy who was a sort of private investigator, but also stuntman in the movies. And me and my brother were very taken by it. We imagined we were stuntmen. You can imagine how frightened our mum was of what we were doing. We were crazy. But
You're surprised you're still
that's right. Very,
right.
very. We had a competition to see who could break as many things as possible on our own bodies. But we of the generation, I guess you understand this, that during the school holidays, we were given some sandwiches in the morning and a bottle of water and shushed out the house. And then you came back later at night when
You
you
were
were,
dirty, you were hungry, you were
that's right.
tired, and
Yeah.
your parents had no clue where you were.
Absolutely. But also, it was a really interesting time as well, I think, because all the local parents knew each other's children. And
Yeah.
so all the
And they
kids
would
were out.
discipline you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh,
The
God.
neighbor would tell you, you can't talk that way.
Absolutely.
Or don't
Absolutely.
just walk into my refrigerator.
Yeah,
Ask
yeah.
for permission.
Yeah. And we'd all play together and all the parents would look after the kids and all that sort of stuff. So there was a sense in which people knew each other. So, but these days, I think people are quite frightened of letting their kids do that sort of stuff.
And I think there was something really sweet about that
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
right?
very
Because
definitely.
we were able to explore
Yeah, yeah,
and to really imagine
yeah,
as you did,
yeah.
because the world was your oyster and you could go and you can explore and you can, you didn't have to worry as much. It was a different time.
And it is different. I think for kids, young people these days, I have a lot of admiration for young people these days. I really find them very impressive in terms of how they think about life and how they think about themselves and what they will accept and what they won't accept. And particularly, it's obvious I would say this, but certainly the better understanding of mental health issues and certainly is so much better, I think. And they
I
act,
agree.
yeah,
I think it's because we weren't, as I have shared in my book and conversations, that mental health wasn't a topic we
no,
explored.
that's right. That's
You
right.
know, We were told to do this and do that, and we did it. Mental health wasn't something we discussed.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I remember my mum, she struggled a lot as a sort of working class Irish girl, and she used to be given, I think, Valium by the doctor. That was it. That was the deal in those days, was to be given
Yeah.
a highly toxic, highly addictive medication. And I do sometimes listen to these sort of guys, mostly on TV, talking about the snowflake generation. I think, well, I don't think we got it right in the past, to be honest. So if we want to just put people on Valium and leave them to it, that's not a good answer. And I think these days we have better answers. We're educating our kids to look after themselves and give them knowledge, and which I think is a good step forward. But I do think there's something missing as well from this adventure playground that I remember as a kid, just
There's a
the
balance there somewhere.
there's got to be, hasn't there? And I think there's a lot of frightening stuff on the news about kids at risk from strangers and stuff like that. And so I understand why people do that. But your growing up sounds like it was very supported, almost idyllic. You had a lot of freedom. I'm sure that there were issues as well. What do you remember about school and going to school?
I loved school, and I'm going back to school at 58 years old. I loved
Great.
school.
Well
I am
done.
the only person in my family. My parents hated school. They were forced to leave education early because of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
siblings were not good students. And I just took it all in. I loved it. I loved the idea of having access to education and learning
Mhm.
and the curiosity of it all. So I was your typical, top student,
Yeah.
and sponge. I just took it all in.
Great.
Bring it
Did you
my way. I want to learn about it.
Did you go on to college and do graduate stuff as
I
well?
did. So I went on to college. I studied education and English.
Yeah,
So became a teacher
right.
of English and language arts.
Great.
And just now, and you'll appreciate this, going to school to get my MSW.
Well done. Well done. Yeah. Masters in Social Work, for people who don't know, in the UK,
Yes,
that's a psychotherapy training. Social work in the
absolutely.
UK isn't psychotherapy, it's something else. So just so that people know, an MSW is a psychotherapist, and a very practical one from my experience of working with MSWs, very sort of knowledgeable and grounded in the real world. So you were attracted to helping people by the sounds of it.
From the very beginning,
Right.
it's interesting. I had something, it was just innate in me, that being a nurturer.
Okay.
And I recognized at an early age that I wanted to help people and I enjoyed helping people. And I think the beginning of that was with my own grandparents.
Ah,
And you know, being back in those days, on Sundays, Italian family, we spent Sundays visiting our
yeah,
grandparents. That was what we did.
yeah,
Sunday was the day to have meals with your grandparents. And there was no debate about that.
yeah,
You went and you visited your grandparents and helped them. And then when I became old enough to drive, I would drive them around to do errands.
yeah,
And when my grandmother was in the hospital, I mean, I think I was 19 or 20 years old. I was the one who picked her up
yeah.
and gave her a bath and helped her. So it's interesting. I think I wish there was more of that level of understanding that a family is a generational unit.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I think still in Italy today, intergenerational households are still the norm,
yes,
very
yes.
much so. But in other places, they seem to have died out. And I was just talking to somebody the other day about this sort of lack of understanding of the role of the older generation, the next generation, the ones that preceded us, and the important role. And we're seeing this phenomenon now of loneliness killing older people, literally. And
Absolutely agree.
it's the most sort of avoidable mental illness on the planet, loneliness or a social animal is a dreadful state to be in. And these days, when we do intake assessments now in the UK for sort of psychological assessments, we ask people specifically, do you feel lonely? Because we know how destructive it is. But yes, I find it sad as well.
I do too. And the
Yeah,
fascinating thing about it is that people who've been around for 80, 90 years, my mother-in-law who's going to be 100 next month,
yeah,
have so much wisdom and so many stories and experiences to share
yeah,
that we have no idea. We can learn so much from spending time with them.
yeah.
And you've lived 90 years on the earth. There's so much room for forgiveness and understanding and
I think that's right. People who are older tend to be slightly more phlegmatic about things. I've been there, done it. You'll be okay. Don't worry about this. It's fine. It's just part of life's tapestry. They understand the story, you know?
they do. They value the most important thing, love, acceptance,
Yeah.
and
And
your
the F
health
word, forgiveness.
and forgiveness. So it's
Amazingly important. Amazingly important.
it
So
is so
that
important.
that was sort of being of service with your grandparents, as it were, being part of the family was part of what encultured you into wanting to help. Were there other elements as well?
Yeah,
Thinking? Yeah.
something major happened to me when I was 13 years old.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, major thing. So it was in May. A lot of things have happened to me in May, but it was May 23rd, 1979. I
Mhm.
was 13 years old. I played soccer,
Mhm.
and back then before high school, I just played with my friends, and my girlfriend Deb and I were standing on our middle school soccer field, our athletic field, and we were spying on our two crushes. When you're 13 and 14, you have
Yeah,
crushes.
I remember
And
those.
yeah, we're spying on our crushes and daydreaming about them. One was Billy, one was Tim.
Right.
And the day was beautiful. There was not a cloud in the sky. It was sunny. And out of nowhere, all I remember is the loudest boom in my life. It was just
Okay.
this loud noise, and we all fell to the ground.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, what the hell was that? Brushing off and standing up and looking around, and everybody was doing the same thing, with the exception of Billy and Tim. And that was a lightning bolt that struck, and it directly hit Billy, and he died on the
Oh,
way to the hospital at
wow.
the age of 14.
Wow.
And our friend Tim survived. And that process of seeing, I ran over to them because they
Yeah.
were within our distance. They were 100
Yeah.
feet
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And the idea of that life could be taken
Yeah.
so quickly. You're 13 and you're thinking boyfriends and possibly marriage and proms and your world is idyllic, and you
Yeah.
never think that something like that can happen and happen within your own little world so
Mhm.
traumatically. And when I recognized that, I didn't know what to do with that grief for years. I remember I went to speak to my priest, and we had a couple days of counseling in school.
Mhm.
And I maybe, who knows if I even saw a therapist, because we didn't have the money for a therapist.
Mhm.
Um,
It wouldn't have been the norm.
no,
No.
no. So it was probably 3 days of someone coming in as a school counselor saying, if you need anything, and I'm
Mhm.
here. But I had no idea what to do with that feeling
Yeah.
and no way to process it. And we didn't talk about coping skills back then. And it wasn't until one of our classmates, Joe, decided to start a fundraiser and create the Billy Carr Scholarship,
Right.
that I had a place for that
Mhm.
grief. It was
Mhm.
like, okay, put that grief into action. What can I do? How can I help? And that was really one of the first times I understood that, well, I didn't understand on that level, but that things are going to happen.
Mhm.
And you have to find out how to cope. You had to understand how to cope because there's no way to control the external forces in your life, the things that happen.
No, the things that we can't manage, but the things that we can manage are ourselves and our responses. I'm always interested why and how somebody decides to transform a tragedy rather than retreat, which is, I'm not questioning or judging either response, but I'm interested in the transformation. So that's your early six. I mean, that sounds really, I mean, it's very shocking at that age to have something out of the blue like that in front of you, and involving you so personally as well. It must have been dreadful, to be honest, sort of
Yeah.
well beyond a child to be able to cope with it.
Yeah, my adulthood started that day. And it
Yes,
still brings tears to me
of
today
course.
because that vision, and it took a long time for me not to fall asleep thinking about what I saw that day.
Yeah, yeah, which is the definition of a traumatic event, isn't it? That's trauma
It is.
processing, those intrusive memories and experiences, your body and your mind trying to deal with it. And that sort of had that sort of transformative thing that was offered. You were offered a way of processing it in the real world, as it were, with this memorial fund to sort of look after other people. So that was first. The next bit of your life was the next phase was you, I guess you finish school, you go on to college, you train as a teacher, and you start your career as a teacher. Again, sort of helping. What sort of kids, what sort of ages were you teaching at that time?
So I was 21 years old and I was teaching seventh grade, and eighth grade. But some of my kids were 14, 15 years old.
Right.
A few of them had been left back. I also taught a remedial class. So, here I am at 21 years old teaching language arts, and I
Yeah.
love language arts. I was teaching writing, spelling, and literature, and
Yeah.
those are the things that I absolutely love. So got to teach and bring, Shakespeare
Yeah.
and and
What was it
the
about that? What were you attracted to, do you think, in terms of the language arts and teaching language and prose
you
and
know, looking back now, I think the power of speech and the power of writing
yeah,
gives you a voice. It gives you a voice. And when you're growing up in an element where you don't have a voice, I was not, I grew up in the age of children should be seen, not heard.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and and to be able to give these children uh the power and the interest and the love for literature and language,
mm,
and to be able to express themselves is a gift.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love that about my job.
There's also, I mean, there's a number of themes there, I think. I mean, one is, and I don't know what it was like for you in your family, but certainly my family was still in transition from the sort of Irish Catholic stuff into, we were more English and not Catholic and not religious and all that sort of stuff. I don't know where your family were in all of that stuff and sort of,
It was a very strange dichotomy in my household.
sure,
I
sure.
grew up with statues everywhere.
Yeah.
So my mother collected crosses and statues. So there were religious
It's really
items all over
strange,
my
that element
house.
of
Yeah.
Catholicism. Those icons are just really strange.
But yes, but I went to
Did
church
you
by
have the
myself.
ones with flashing lights as well?
Yeah, yeah. But I went to church by myself. So my family did not attend church, but I rode my bike and then drove my car to church by myself. So it was interesting. There was this, this understood faith and that you need to pray and you need to be a good person, but there wasn't any type of practice.
Yeah.
And I made it my practice to go to church.
It's interesting. The practice of going to church in my family dropped off relatively quickly, but I used to enjoy church, the smells and the bells. And when I was sort of going to church, it was still quite high mass, and it would be sung, and sometimes in Latin, and lots of incense. I don't think they do much of that these days. So, but I remember that the theatricality of it, if you like.
It's interesting because I attended church in sometimes in Camden, New Jersey,
Yeah.
and it's this most beautiful old church,
Mm.
Sacred Heart, in the midst of, so much chaos and
Yeah.
pain. Camden is a very challenged city,
Mhm.
and the incense is still there, and
Right.
it brings me right back. And to this day, I
Always.
I have
Always.
incense in my house,
As soon as
and
I
it
smell
just brings me
frankincense, it
back to,
calms me down. It
yeah,
really
yeah,
does.
the power of senses and smells, right?
Yeah, really amazing stuff. And when I hear sung Latin mass, it stops me in my track, and I just sit down and I calm down. And those spaces are physically are very beautiful, aren't they? A lot of them, they
Right.
wide, expansive spaces that allow the mind to sort of settle. I don't feel particularly religious, but I like those spaces very much. The other thing I was thinking about is the attraction to this sort of literate thinking and literate capacity. Again, I think there's a strong body of research about the difference between oral and literate cultures, and the how literacy has changed the human psyche, um, and you'll know from when you do your training as well in terms of child development, things like creative play. So those creative play, which are the precursors of literacy skills, the ability to sit and magically change spaces and use your imagination, which are the skills that you need for reading and writing, literally.
Mm.
Um, and so there's something there, I think. I was always attracted to fantasy and literature. Actually, I got involved in theatre as well. I became an actor because I was really interested in that experience of being other people, I guess. So I got that.
So I have that in common with you.
Oh, do you? Well,
I
do
have done
you-
some, I have done a little acting myself, and I
yeah,
have
great.
done some extra work.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think there's something about, particularly in the transformation of experience, if you've had a traumatic experience like yourself, often the arts and literature can be a very healing experience because, again, a lot of the stories that cultures have about, again, going back to this thing about older folk in the culture, they often carry the oral stories, the personal stories, and the wider myths that teach us how to sort of manage and deal with things.
It's amazing how that makes complete sense to me, yet I wouldn't have made that correlation.
Right.
So I really appreciate you sharing that because it makes complete sense.
Yeah, it is. I think stories. I did when I did my training. I was lucky enough to train with a therapist who had researched myth and story, and had written extensively about the role of myth and story in human culture and human healing, particularly how stories can heal. And we were talking about it when we before the show about telling one's own story can be an offering to other people who maybe are struggling, because then we connect, don't we, on a human level?
I think the older we get to
Yeah.
the word connection, we are all human and we all have our stories.
Yes.
And connecting and learning from each other is so powerful.
Yeah.
Telling those stories, right? Sharing those stories and telling those stories
Yeah.
is powerful and cathartic.
Yeah. I was very inspired by a woman writer in the UK called Dorothy Hetker, who used drama as an educational medium. She always talked about this thing about don't teach the subject, teach the substrate. What's the universal human experience beneath the words that you're trying to get to? Once you've got that in a classroom, and she worked a lot with very challenging children. She said, once you got that, the kids were fine. They would then want to learn because they felt connected to each other. And a sense of safety was born from that connection.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'll have to get her information from you.
So I'll send it to you. She's a very interesting lady. Work blue collar. You would call her blue collar. That was her background, working with challenging kids. How did you experience being a teacher? What would you sort of, what was your experience of it over the years?
I loved teaching.
Yeah,
I loved connecting with students, with children. And I had children who were very poor,
yeah,
where I happened to teach, served children who were living in trailer homes and
yeah,
in poverty.
yeah.
And back then, $350,000 homes who were very wealthy.
Mm,
So it was this combination.
yeah.
And I very quickly became, teaching is a chance to, it's really one of the only professions so closely to motherhood.
Yes, yes.
You are
Yeah,
an actress, you
yeah,
are a nurse,
yeah,
you are a caregiver,
yeah,
you are an educator, you are an actress, because some days you have to show up and give so much joy and love, and
yeah,
you are tired and
yeah,
feeling defeated.
yeah.
And so it was a chance for me to utilize all of my skills
Sure, sure.
and also to think about my challenges.
Yeah.
I did not come from an educated family. I had to learn how to pronounce words that some of my eighth graders knew and I didn't.
Fascinating.
Honestly, it's,
I
these,
imagine you dealt with that without it being a problem. You would just go, "Oh, I need to learn that. Thank you," and you would encourage
absolutely,
learning and openness, I imagine.
absolutely. It was
Great role model.
humbling because, like I said, and I still say I am learning things in my 50s, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really didn't understand so much of life and my own trauma, my journey, how I think, how I was trained to think, and how I had to change my thinking and my mindset until my late 40s,
mm.
which means that anyone can learn, anyone
Yeah, I agree.
can
There's
change
also,
their mindset.
we know, I mean, just coming back to the notion of nurturing and mothering in school, because we know for a fact that attachment processes are reopened in children when they go to school, which is why school can be so healing for children who've had a tough background. It's a protective factor for children in risk. And we know that for a fact. It's really important. And it can change the psychology of children, it can change their personality. I'm going to get a little bit of soapbox here because I get very annoyed about the politicization of schools, which whoever's doing it, I don't really care. Just leave teachers alone. Let them do their core job of nurturing and caring for children. That's their job. And then they've got a curriculum and they'll put knowledge inside of children. And everybody else needs to back off, to be
You
honest.
know what? If I just had this conversation and I need to share it. So my sister-in-law passed away of cancer. Her name was Kim, and her sister Bonnie just purchased for Mother's Day, purchased a few of my books for families to give away. And this is what she said to me. So she's a teacher. And she said, I read it, and one of the things that really resonated with me is I'm a teacher, and sometimes children are so trying on your patients.
Yeah.
And she said it was such a reminder that as teachers, we don't want to be another trying person.
Yeah.
We want to be their nurturer. We want to give to them. We
Yes.
want to be that
Yeah.
person who hears them, who
Absolutely.
supports them, because we have no idea what happens at home.
Yeah.
We have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Even if you think you might know, that doesn't necessarily mean you know.
And I think there's, again, thinking of that attachment model, if we think of that primary carer model, which you've introduced that notion. So the job of the secondary carers around the primary carer and that relationship is to support that relationship, right? That's our task. Whoever that secondary carer is, it's a very important task. In this context, the secondary carer is society, isn't it? It's society has to put the resources into those relationships so they can be effective. That's the bottom line here. And
Absolutely agree.
we need to stop attacking educators and teachers, and we need to nurture them and support
We
them
do.
and give them the resources they need.
They have a hard job.
Yeah,
I had 130 students and I taught 7 out of 8 classes a day.
Wow.
And, every night I would come home and I would grade papers. And because I was doing what I was doing, it was all reading papers and
Yeah.
tests and creating more. And then I had to read everything that I taught again and again and think of thoughtful questions to ask and how I could relate this to their lives, their young lives, for teachable moments.
I just want to say, while we're
Absolutely.
on the subject, I just want to say a shout out to Eric, who was my English teacher. I don't think he's alive anymore, but he transformed my life. He
You
really
know,
did. Inspired me. I'm remembering to this day everything about him. Absolutely inspirational figure in my life.
that is so touching. And I have done the same. I've
Yeah.
shared in Hope Givers that 2 teachers, I had no idea that college was an option for me. But in 11th grade, my boyfriend's mother, who had put 7 children through college, and 2 of my teachers said, you should go to college. And I'm like, me?
Yeah.
I can go to college? And they said, yes, we're gonna help you find scholarships to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that is how I went. If 3 of those people did not stand up for me,
Great. I
but
was
they
the
did.
first in my family to go to do college as well, so lots of identification there. Lots of encouragement in the days when it was unusual for people from my background to go to college. Very
Yeah.
unusual. So
We're very lucky, aren't we?
yeah, I mean, it was my way of developing and growing as human beings. So I'm a great fan of it. It doesn't work for everybody. Didn't work for my brother. That's fine. He has a great life. In many ways, much better than mine. To be honest. Like, he's got 1 million grandchildren at the last count, and there's more on the way. So that's impressive.
Good for him.
I want to get, because I'm aware of time, I'm getting caught up in your story, and I need to sort of move us on the time a little bit. We're going to have to jump forward. Your story is fascinating to me. I was really touched by it and lots of resonances. But we're here as well to talk about the ALS support. And I'm going to circle back towards the end of the show and ask you about all the books you've written and where people can find them. So I know people are going, oh, I want to read that book. I'll give you the opportunity, folks. We'll know. So tell me about meeting the guy that eventually you got sort of widowed from, and that led
Oh,
to,
my late husband,
yeah, your late husband. Yeah.
Kevin, my late
Yeah.
husband, Kevin. So I was a teacher, and
Yeah.
his mother, Marge, was the reading specialist. So we worked closely together, and she kept telling me, I have this amazing son and I want you to meet. And we did, and he was amazing. We married and had a baby, and I, I think about him every single day of my life,
Right.
because he was diagnosed with ALS at the age of 30, but his symptoms started at 29 and I was 28, and we had a little baby, a
Yeah.
2-year-old.
Yeah.
And the power of expressing living with life while you're dying
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
is the best lesson you can give anyone, truly. To think about the fact that he woke up every day and was losing more of himself, because ALS, or MND, Hope Loves Company is a part of the International Alliance. So I have worked with many people who call ALS MND, and have spoken in Italy and in Ireland and in Iceland as well.
Yeah.
And
First of all, tell us ALS, what it means, so that people
yeah,
understand.
so
Not
ALS is
everybody will know, I don't think.
yes, ALS is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and this is ALS Awareness Month in the United States, May. And it's a neuromuscular disease, and basically, in layman's terms, the cells in your spinal column die at an enormous rate, and because they die, the message between your brain and your extremities fails.
Mm-hmm.
So your mind is telling your arm to move, but the cells cannot get that message. So you lose the ability to talk, walk, eat, and eventually breathe. And
Yeah.
my husband lost the ability to walk in a year. In 2 years, he had a feeding tube because he could no longer swallow.
Yeah.
And in 3 years, he could no longer breathe unassisted, so he was ventilated. So when he passed away, he was unable to talk, walk, he was unable to eat, and he was paralyzed
Mhm.
and on a ventilator. And, you know, while I always say that while he was losing those skills, I was trying to teach our toddler those
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. How old was she when he did pass away?
she was 8.
She was 8. So she would have been aware of it by that age and sort of
She was aware, and um the she knew other daddies, right?
yeah.
Other daddies can. Why can't my daddy? But she was loving, and it didn't faze her. That was her daddy.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
when she was with him, she just climbed on his lap in the wheelchair, and she knew to wipe his mouth with, when he couldn't, and she wanted to help because children are natural caregivers.
Yeah.
Children,
Yeah.
children, they're not phased.
Mhm.
And it's amazing. You'll appreciate this. One of the things that I noticed is when we were out and Kevin was on a ventilator,
Mhm.
and let's just say we went to the mall as a family. Now he can't speak and he's on a ventilator and it's loud and he's in a wheelchair and Elena's on his lap. Children would come up and say, "What's wrong with him?"
Yes, quite.
You know?
Quite.
They were
Absolutely.
curious, and adults wouldn't even look.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I sort of lots of my disabled friends are in wheelchairs and had oddly shaped bodies would point this out to me. So a friend of mine asked me to push him around in a wheelchair one day and said, "Just observe this."
Yeah.
And every single child came up and wanted to sit on his lap and talk to him. Every adult was shushing them, avoiding eye contact. I mean, it's almost like you would see their faces just sliding away. And yet, every single time the child came up and talked to him, he was delighted. He was absolutely delighted.
And that is how we provide inclusiveness,
Yeah,
by allowing children to ask questions and explore
it's
and to
interesting. I
have those conversations,
Yeah, I
right?
know. It's interesting. I've just written a little article around autism. We have unfortunately, here in the UK, we're going a little bit backwards in autism care at the moment. So we need to advocate for it. But one of the questions the news outlet wanted answered was, how do we make life more inclusive for autistic people? And I said, don't stop your kids from asking those questions that embarrass you. Just let them get on with it, because they'll form the relationships for you. And again, it comes back to this connection and relationship. It's the most key thing I think we all need when we're in the community, to feel part of or connected, visible to other people, not invisible and hidden, you know.
Absolutely.
And so, how old is your daughter now? So that people can contextualize it.
I'm sorry.
How old is your daughter now? Just so that people can contextualize it.
Oh, how old is she now?
Yeah.
She's 31 years old, and she has a baby.
Right. So life goes on, life continues, and
Yes.
so I just can't imagine how challenging it was for you, though. I mean, also you're gonna, I know, lightly skip over this question, but there you were caring for hundreds of children in your school. You have a young daughter who you're nurturing in the early stages of her very important developmental phases. And then you have a husband who's has a neurodegenerative disease that needs increasing levels of care. That must mean a phenomenal sort of pressure on you.
And no coping skills because I didn't learn them.
Yes. What did you do? How did you manage?
So, honestly, what I did was I prayed a lot.
Yeah.
I I showed up as I needed to show up, and I could suppress things. And then every once in a while I lost it. What I would do is when the nurses came, we had 8 hours of nursing help.
Yeah.
And that was typically through the night, although it took two of us to turn my husband. It took two of us to do many things.
But they
So
wake you up
I
and
was fueled by caffeine. I had no sleep.
sure.
I was exhausted beyond measure. I remember you know, going places and not knowing how I got there.
Yeah.
Because I had to pick up medications and I had to do these things, yet I'm exhausted. And I did my best to show up, and I just suppressed. And there's a great place in our country called Wawa, and it's just a convenience store.
Yeah.
But to me, it was my sanctuary,
Okay.
because I would drive there before the morning nurse left at 7 a.m. So the nurse left, and then I'd have to get Alina up and get her ready for school.
Yeah.
So I would drive there, I would get a latte and a bagel and a paper, and everything sat except for the latte. And I would sit there and cry my eyes out in the car for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And just say, why is this and how is this happening? And God gave me the strength, and I'd cry, and then I'd wipe my tears and go back and get Alina up and help get Kevin up, and my day would start.
Yeah.
And that was how I handled. That was it.
Yeah.
And I had amazing family and friends who supported us. And my parents, my in-laws, everyone showed up for us.
Yeah.
But life went on for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, I described it as being in a bubble. So while our young friends were having more children and getting bigger homes and going to the next job, we were going backwards.
Mm-hmm.
We were not only stuck, but we were going backwards. And as a nurturer and as a fixer, I wanted to fix it.
Yeah.
This is something I could not fix.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to fix it. So I spent 6 years doing my best, making my husband's last years as quality of life as possible. You know, what did he want for his life?
Yeah. And that's very much the story of sort of anybody who cares for somebody with a long-term chronic illness, sometimes leading to an early death as well. And I remember, there were moments, I guess, and just remembering about my sister, I'm sort of ruminating on some of the moments I had with her. And I remember when she, for example, she left 3 children behind, and we're going to get on to that in a moment, what that's about.
And I'm so sorry for that loss.
It's part of life, and it is a very significant part of life. And in some ways, I think this death taboo that we have, we don't talk about it enough. The fact that death is a very much part of life, and rarely is death the way it's presented on the movies, sort of like with soft focus.
Or in our minds, right?
That's right.
Our minds are always, oh, what's the next wonderful thing that's going to happen? We're
Absolutely.
planning.
No, but it's
we don't
there.
plan for, our husband to be terminally ill, or
quite.
our stocks to go
talked to my sister
out the window.
Yeah, I remember talking to my sister. She didn't have a voice at that point, but she did have a little iPad thing which had a voice communicator thing on it, so she could.
Toby.
Yeah,
is what we use here in the United States.
It was great. It was a lifesaver. It meant she could go back to school with her kids and go to the parent-teacher association, things like that, and it sort of changed her life. But I asked her one day, I said, how do you deal? Why are you not depressed? Are you taking medication for depression, thinking about dying and leaving your kids behind? And she said, no. I said, how do you deal with it? She said, oh, I don't think about it. Which goes back to that point you said. It's like very much, I think, when you're in there, you're looking at this moment and how do I make this moment work?
Right. Day by day, you're in survival mode.
Yeah.
You don't think about, yeah.
And so the rest, I was
really
like,
have no choice.
She's like, no, I just want to breathe, just want to have a conversation, just want to make sure my kids are fed. It was that sort of stuff. And she was like really sort of all in her life.
She sounds like an amazing woman.
Yeah, she was extraordinary. How did your husband deal with it? How was he?
He was the same way. He had a sense of humor. I tell the story of when he could no longer talk. I read his lips for the last 1.5 years of his life.
Right.
And whenever I speak, I share the story of how he would look out the window. We had this, our wonderful family and friends came and built this addition, and he had this big window, glass door and big window. And so you could look out back, and there was a pot out back on a fence or something, and it irritated him, right? So here he is on a ventilator, he can't speak, he can't move, but this pot irritated him. So I had to read his lips through cliches. And he said, that pot is an accident waiting to happen. Like he had us speaking cliches. And I'm like,
Right.
it was never changed who he was.
Yeah.
He's still the amazing man he was, right?
Beautiful.
So,
Beautiful.
and I'm
That's
thinking,
beautiful.
couldn't he just say pot out back?
Yeah, yeah. Move the pot, get on with it. No, no, he still had to use his
No,
mind and
it didn't
create.
change who he was.
Yeah. How did so you're going through this at the time you're going through this, you're getting amazing support, you're somehow surviving, which is a very familiar story to me. At what point, I don't want to get into, there would have been the inevitable crash after he died, I'm sure.
Major crash.
I'm sure, but we don't really have time to go into that, unfortunately. I'm thinking we need another show with you, is what I'm thinking at the moment. We're running out of time. At what point did you then think, well, the stuff I need to learn from this, the stuff I need to offer to the world, and this, and then thinking about Hope Loves Company, the organization you set up to promote sort of support, particularly for children affected by a loss.
Well, the story is that I met my current husband, who also
Yeah.
lost his wife to ALS.
Oh, wow.
And yes, I was a foster parent to my niece. I started a job working at the ALS Hope Foundation, which still exists and provides care for patients living with ALS, and met my current husband, who lost his wife to ALS, and became a bonus mom to my other children.
I love that saying. I've not come across it. A bonus mom. That's a lovely way of saying
bonus mom. Love it. And because I
love
always
it.
have 3 children, and I do, which is just amazing and a miracle in itself, because you couldn't have more children. But anyway, so in this process of, I'm, here I am, and you don't realize that how much grief is affecting every one of us, because we all have lost someone to ALS.
Yeah.
And here I am with the fixer mindset, and hey, I can bring us all to this place of healing, and I haven't healed myself, right?
Right.
The irony of it all. And it dawned on me that my children had all experienced the same thing, but were grieving differently.
Mhm.
And even my training as a teacher was not enough to provide for them. So the idea of Hope Loves Company and giving voice to children who were caregiving to parents, and helping parents, and then sadly losing parents. And no one was recognizing that here are these young caregivers who are doing things like helping with feedings and range of motion, and even steering wheelchairs, and who wanted to be a part of this process, and who found value in that process, or had to be a part of the process because they're old enough to help, and they needed to.
Mhm.
And so the idea of Hope Loves Company came to mind, and the idea of hope givers came to mind.
Yeah.
What I recognized was, okay, I'm 42 years old. I have 3 great children and a great husband, and I have wallowed in my sadness long enough.
I tell you, if you did a lot of wallowing, that's quite unkind.
I did. I was so, and I was never angry, but I was so disappointed that so much was taken away from us.
Of course,
all of us. And
that's hardly
so
wallowing.
caught up in,
That's
was so caught up in
normal.
the fact that there are people whose lives just go,
I
There are
know.
people who
I
have
know.
these lives that just flow,
Yeah.
and they don't know loss, and they don't know pain, and
Sure.
then I just was so like, why can't that be? And it's not. Okay, so put on your big girl pants and realize that your life is going to be what you make it, and bottom line. And so I started to, the shell of who I was really started to heal when I created something that helped to heal others.
Right. That's the secret.
Bingo.
That's the secret. Yeah. But also, when you're talking, and I'm going to challenge the word wallowing. I don't like you being unkind to yourself, so I'm not going to accept it. You are healing. You were having a time to heal, and you needed a time to heal. That's what was happening, and that's reasonable. But I'm also, while you're talking, I'm thinking about that 13-year-old girl who witnessed that lightning strike and who had to carry on with life rather than somebody sitting down and saying, "What about you?" You know? And somehow you transformed that experience, it seems to me, in setting up this, going, "What about these kids?
You
What
know,
about," I think that's truly admirable. I don't know if it's conscious, but I think it's a truly admirable impulse. And we always do want to make things better for our kids, don't we?
we do. Children have always been my go-to because adults can make decisions
Yes.
and children depend on adults.
Yes.
And so children, here are these children, and here I am thinking I can just have this magic wand and be a mom and fix things. And my children, 4 or 5 years later or 10 years later from this experience woke up with what happened.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And
And
simultaneously we're all figuring it out.
yeah.
Then I realized, like, I don't know anything. I'm 42 years old and I don't know anything. And that's when Hopeless Company started, and
Right.
the healing process really started.
And I think that idea of hope being invested in how we prepare our kids and support our kids through these things really makes sense to me. There's, again, linking into that intergenerational connection thing. Okay, we're learning from this. We can learn from this. We can change. We can do things better going forwards. Which is why, that's why I strongly feel a lot of admiration for kids these days and young people these days, that they are carrying the baton and they're carrying it really well.
They are. And
They
hope
really
does
are.
not mean that my husband will not die.
No, not at all.
Hope can mean that I'm going to keep his memory alive.
Yeah,
Hope,
and also transforming it into something meaningful. I
yes.
think that's key. I'm interested in how much you talked about prayer. I don't think we need to talk about necessarily religion or anything, but how much does having a spiritual sense for you, how important has that been for you, do you think?
So it's so important to me
Right.
because the thing that I have recognized is that when I was in hell, really just trying to keep Kevin alive and happy,
Yeah.
I recognized then that there were two groups of people. There were people who had no faith and just was like, let me get through this and I need to go on. And then there were people who had faith and said, this is part of my brokenness.
Yeah.
And I'm going to learn from this and I'm going to be a better person.
Yeah.
And I choose faith and thinking that, okay, life is not easy. And was it meant to be easy? We think it's supposed to be easy. We think it's supposed to be wonderful and perfect.
Yeah.
But we grow through our brokenness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these experiences are going to happen. And as soon as we accept that and understand how to move forward with them, and in a way that also serves.
Yeah.
Because if you go through something horrific and tragic and never utilize that experience to possibly support, I'm not saying I have to say, oh, I can help you with this. I'm saying, I'm here if you want me to help you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if it's just listening.
Yeah.
The person who brought dinner to us when I didn't have to cook, that was helping.
Yeah.
That person may not have even come into my house. A
Yeah.
person may have left it on my porch. That person who picked up my child from school when I thought I was going to be home from the hospital with Kevin and I wasn't, that was helping.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the power of nurturing and helping and being and giving hope has so many possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's in that connection again, I think, isn't it?
It is.
The breaking down of the sense of isolation, because I think these types of events can make us very isolated, which is another way of thinking about whether you have faith or not. whether you maintain that sense of something bigger than me. There's other people. It could be God, it could be other people. It doesn't really matter as long as there is that sense of there's something other than me that I'm connected to, that is there for me benignly. And as long as we don't disconnect, the crucial thing I think as social animals is not to become disconnected from the human flow of experience.
Yes, absolutely.
Really important stuff. So we're at the end of the show. I mean, it always sort of creeps up on people sort of unawares that it's at the end. And I'm sorry I've had to jump us forward, but I wanted to get to this point
Great.
because it is really important during this time to sort of raise the issues. So how many books have you written now, and what are they called?
Yeah, so I've written 3 books. The
Yeah.
first 2 were primarily about ALS. So one is called The Stars That Shine, and one is called Someone I Love Has ALS, The Caregiver's Guide. And then I recently wrote Hope Givers, and this is really a celebration of the people who have taught me about hope, who have provided hope, and who have reminded me to be a hope giver.
Yeah.
So you can't just receive hope. You need to also pay it forward and continue that cycle of hope. So Hope Givers and The Stars That Shine and Someone I Love Has ALS, they're all on Amazon. And
Right.
when you purchase Someone I Love Has ALS, and when you purchase The Stars That Shine, which is a children's book, by the way, based on a true story of how our daughter hated the wheelchair and the handicap accessible van, and how I had to learn how to implement those into her little world. You benefit Hope Loves Company, the nonprofit that supports children.
Wonderful.
And yes, they're all are available. And I have really, you are just a gift. I appreciate what you're doing. I've really enjoyed our time together.
Same here. I mean, I'm very touched by your story. It's amazing stuff. This whole notion transformation of experience is wonderful and very hope-giving. Does your nonprofit have a website that people
It
can?
does. It's hopelovescompany.org.
Okay, so for people in the UK, a nonprofit is another word for charity. In
Yes.
the US, you say nonprofit. Here, we say charity. So it's a charity that supports people. Do you provide groups or connections with
We
people?
do. We have virtual sessions.
Wonderful.
We have a scholarship. We have virtual sessions for, healing sessions. They're called Hangouts. I run a
Right.
parent meet and greet, and then our executive director, Jennifer, runs our children hangouts so the children can connect.
Brilliant.
We also have camps in the United States that are free of charge for our families to come together
That's
for a
so.
weekend, and we have one next weekend in New Jersey. So I will be there, and we
I'm
have
going to fly over just for
80 people who come out together, and every single person their life has been affected by ALS.
absolutely superb. Really amazing stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad we
Thank
returned to
you.
the
Thank you
interview.
so much. Have a great
Um,
day, and thank you.
we'll make sure that when the show goes out, all the links to the books and your non-profit are there so that people can find it easily. Again, folks, if you have questions, send them to me and I'll pass them on to Jodie. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them. One thing, this is, I don't know how you feel about it. It sounds a little bit sort of trite to say, but I think it is real that the pandemic created a situation in which connections between people grew. And I certainly wouldn't have imagined being able to talk to you today without that have happened and us going online and just determined to make connections with each other. And obviously it was horrific as an event, but some of the consequences I think have made the world better and made the world smaller and more connected, which is having heard your story is one of those events for me, and I'm really touched by you. So you stay there for now. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody for now. It was wonderful to have Jodie on. I think I'm going to sort of get Teresa, my part of my team, to reach out to you and come back another time. We'll talk about some of the other experiences you've had. I hope you've enjoyed the show, folks, and I'll see you in the next time. Jodie's been a super guest. Really wonderful to have you on. I'm going to say goodbye for now. Do you want to say goodbye to the UK, Jodie?
Thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Wonderful to have you on.
Mhm.